Hey everyone, thanks for hanging out with me today. I promised I would sit down and chat with you guys about the carnivore diet, and so that's what we're going to talk about today, the carnivore diet and hormonal health. That is primarily why I chose to do the carnivore diet and why it was recommended to me by the holistic practitioner I was working with at the time. And now I want to talk to you guys how it relates in terms of the pregnancy perspective. So the last video we kind of dropped a bomb on you guys, told you guys that we were pregnant. So excited. I'm actually 16 weeks today, so feeling great, energized, all of that's great, but I just wanted to sit down and share my journey with the carnivore diet, how I felt like it helped with certain hormone balances, what that looked like for me, why I did it, and why I believe it played a huge factor in us getting pregnant and now having this beautiful little surprise. So I want to just start this video by saying I am by no means an expert. I am not offering any sort of medical advice. So I'm going to just sit down and have a real, raw, honest conversation with you guys as to why I took that step in moving forward with the carnivore diet, how I felt, the things that I noticed, the things that I saw, how my body changed, how it helped with certain hormonal imbalances I was having at the time, and ultimately how I feel now. Now, I am not doing the carnivore diet as I am pregnant, because I do believe that your body needs a diverse food group. There are certain nutrients that you need in other plants and things like that. But I am following a whole foods based pregnancy, which I have an entirely other video planned out for that, explaining what that is, what that looks like, what I'm eating in a day, what are the supplements I'm taking. But for the sake of just sharing my experience with you guys, because so many are asking, what is the carnivore diet? Let's dive into it, what it is, my approach on it, because I do think I approached it slightly different than some of you guys may or have potentially heard others doing so. All right, so first let's back up to what prompted me to start the carnivore diet. So if you have been following along on this journey for a while, then you probably already know this story. But for some of you who might have just done a quick YouTube search, carnivore diet, and landed here, I hope that there's something in this story that you can relate and connect with that can help you find a path to healing and restoration in your hormone health and even just how you feel, right? Having your mental space in a really good place is huge. Having your body with movement where you feel good and you're operating at optimal levels is huge. And so I hope that by sharing my story, it encourages at least one of you that you can take this leap and actually do it. So I had an emergency surgery where a rare tumor attacked one of my ovaries, and we went in for that surgery and they removed the tumor along with my right ovary. First surgery I've ever had in my entire life, was very active in CrossFit, ate a very, I would say healthy diet, but I was plant-based for 2 years. So a lot of what I was eating, obviously plants, a lot of fruits, legumes, lentils, lots of starches actually, because there was all the sugars and the starches from the fruit. And then that was also a lot of what I was eating as well. A lot of sweet potatoes, a lot of potatoes, things like that. And at the time, I made the decision to become plant-based. It was for no animal rights reasons. It wasn't, some protest I was going after. We are farmers, and so we grow so many vegetables, and that is what I gravitated to. I'd rather have a juice in the morning, than some sort of massive meat-based meal. Smoothies are a go-to of mine, and so it was easier for me to eat that way, and I just enjoyed eating that way. I felt better at the time. However, with a lot of plant-based people, there are a lot of supplementations you have to do to make sure that if you're not eating all of those things to get all the nutrients needed, that you are sourcing those out in other forms. A lot of those would be supplements. I would say I was very poor at supplementing those things out, and therefore I became extremely, deficient in things that were really, really crucial. And so after having met with a holistic practitioner, we dived into that a little bit more and realized that I was actually quite deficient in a lot of things because I had a primarily plant-based diet. And so after my surgery, obviously removing an ovary, it changes a lot on your body, right? Not only was I not able to exercise the way I was used to, my hormone and my hormonal health was extremely out of whack. I was having menstrual cycles about every week and a half to 2 weeks. Having spoken to physicians, it's just going to take a while to get your body leveled out, but I was not operating at an optimal level. In fact, I felt like I was barely getting by. I was very caffeine dependent. I knew I had massive adrenal fatigue, and I was having a hard time knowing how to cure that, how to fix that. And just having really unhealthy habits. And those unhealthy habits were not getting adequate protein, feeling like I had no energy, being very shaky, being very caffeine dependent, being very foggy in the mind. And there were just a lot of different things. I knew that my body was so out of whack. And at this point, I really didn't know the steps to take to start working towards something normal again. And so finally someone introduced me to a holistic practitioner in my area, and so I booked a consultation. We did saliva testing, urine testing, and blood testing, so we could find it on all levels. And what she ended up diagnosing me with was something called HPA, and essentially my stress responders were really high. I was living in fight or flight. It was causing massive adrenal fatigue. I was deficient in a lot of things from not eating meat. So what she recommended was a little extreme, right? Like limiting your caffeine to 1 cup of coffee a day, only if you can accompany it with a meal. If you can't, then no caffeine in the morning. Which I know for some people 1 cup of coffee doesn't seem like that big of a deal. For me at the time, that seemed almost like undoable. Again, being very caffeine dependent, a lot of times using that as actually a meal as well, which I know is not healthy at all. She recommended a very animal-based diet. In fact, like switching out protein powders to whey powders. She was very, very specific. And she also recommended that I quit the intensity style CrossFit workout that I was doing because it was causing those fight or flight responses to activate just because of the style that it was. So that resulted in doing yoga, bar, walking, meditation. Again, all these things that I was not accustomed to. So if I'm being real honest, I felt like my life got ripped out from underneath me, right? It was like, okay, this is how you've eaten. I'm going to tell you you can't do this. This is where type of workouts you do to have mental clarity. You can't do this anymore either. And I felt like it was a big ass. I had to just change everything all at once. And that was something I was not prepared to do. And if I'm being real honest with you guys, I didn't do it. And a lot of those symptoms I had were still there. I still had, I was still very caffeine dependent, which was causing a lot of issues. I was still having issues with menstruation. My body was still not balanced. I was still struggling with a lot when it pertained to my hormonal health. And so finally, after talking to friends, Nathan having a pretty frank conversation with me about like, hey, we've invested in this. We should probably take their advice. Like, how can I do this with you to make this possible for you? And I had talked to some of my friends who had done the carnivore diet and been extremely successful, and they were told to do this to help maintain some of the diagnoses that they had. And so I thought, you know what, at this point, what I'm doing is not working. I really have nothing to lose. So I'm gonna buckle down and I'm gonna do it. One of the things I would say with the carnivore diet, quality matters. If you are going to a grocery store and you're buying meats that are pumped full of hormones and antibiotics, I truly do not believe you're going to see the results you hope for because it's not quality to begin with, right? And so that's the thing, is you have to be in a place where you can invest in that. If you raise your own animals, then that makes it easier for you. And that was the kind of the position we were in. We raised our own pork, we raised lamb, we get a cow at a time, so we had plenty enough beef in stock. And so I knew that I was gonna be limited on what I was eating. We don't raise our own chicken, so we don't eat chicken, but I knew that I could use what we had and it wasn't going to break the bank. But that is something to be mindful of. You know, you want grass-fed if all possible. You want to avoid any sort of antibiotics or hormones that might have been injected into that animal that might also disrupt your hormone function. You want it in the purest way possible. But the great thing about the carnivore diet is that they rally around raw butter, right? And so tallow, lard, we had all of this from our animals that we had rendered down. And so we had an excess of these things. We had grass-fed butter. We had more lard than we knew what to do with. We bought raw cheeses from Azure Standard. And so you could have these things. And I did a lot of, you know, Pinterest research, and there are a lot of different things that you can have. You can have dairy, so you can have eggs, things like that. But there were meals. You could make these different meals with carnivore approved, I guess, ingredients. If I'm being completely honest, on my duration of the carnivore diet, which was for 2 months, what I ate was eggs from our chickens. So free range, grass grazing, you know, great eggs. And so I had that quite frequently. I had a lot of pork because that is what we raised. I had a lot of steak, a lot of beef. I would have butter. And most of my stuff was cooked in butter and lard. Sometimes I would have like a quality salmon if Nathan could find it, or quality cod. But other than that, I didn't do any of the other things. It seemed really complicated to me to find all of these ingredients that complied with the carnivore diet. And for me, I knew if I was gonna make this work, I was gonna have to be okay with my food not exciting me. And it won't. Like, we're massive foodies around here. We love cooking. We love getting creative in the kitchen. You know, growing all of our own food. It was extremely difficult to not just walk out into the garden and pick a cucumber and start munching on it, you know, so it did take discipline, and it was a lot of a mind game for me as well. So I decided, instead of making this super difficult, I was going to mentally commit to do this for 1 month. For 1 month, I was going to strictly just eat meat that was cooked in butter, and that was primarily what my diet was going to be. I wasn't going to try to source out all these other ingredients. I was going to make it as simple as it could be, and I would have to mentally be okay with it being boring, and just commit to that. And that's exactly what it was. It was extremely boring because you have meat with a side of meat, or meat with a side of eggs, which is a lot of what I would do. I would have hard-boiled eggs as my side. I would have scrambled eggs as my side. I would have, you know, a breakfast. Like, my mornings looked like breakfast pork chops and fried eggs. I really didn't steer clear from that. Some mornings I would have steak with some eggs, but it was still eggs and some form of meat. Dinner, I'd have steaks with a side of pork, or steak with a different cut of beef, maybe sausage. And so it wasn't exciting to me. I did find that I got bored with it very quickly. I found it very difficult to eat that much meat. And it went from there's no way I can finish what's on my plate to eventually all of that meat gave me so much energy that I ended up being able to eat more. And by eating more just meant that I felt better. And so if you are wanting to try the carnivore diet, I think Pinterest is a great place to start. I'm sure there's books on it. I never did anything like that. I literally just reached out to friends, asked what they did, and thought, well, how can I make this super, super simple for myself? And so I decided I'm just gonna do all meat. We're not gonna do anything special. I'm not gonna make these different carnivore approved ice creams, which there are. And I knew that I was just gonna do this for a season, and I could mentally get myself to a space where I can endure anything for a season, right? So that's kind of just what I told myself. I have heard a lot of people saying that, you know, make sure you stay home when you start the carnivore diet. Your stomach's gonna be super, super upset, which is what I was expecting, considering I wasn't eating, you know, meat to begin with. And I had started transitioning off of the plant-based diet to where I would eat certain meats, but certainly was not something regular in my diet. But surprisingly, I had no issues like that. My body, I think because it was so deficient in the nutrients that are in good, healthy, clean meat, I had nothing like that. My body immediately absorbed it and knew what to do and instantly went to work. So that is what the carnivore diet looked like for me. It looked like eating 3 meals a day of quality meat, getting in adequate amounts of meat. You should never be hungry on the carnivore diet. So if you are hungry, or maybe you're starting to have headaches or dizziness or fatigue, I found that that was directly linked to not eating enough. And so I had to really work on my mentality and say, hey, you've got to eat adequate amounts of this. And so that was something I learned very early on. I did decide to give up coffee during this process because, again, I knew the effects that my lifestyle before was having. I knew that I didn't know how to handle stress well. I knew when I got stressed or anxious, I would make coffee and that would amplify it. I knew that I worked out at a really hard intensity and I didn't recover well, right? Like, I was made very aware of what the issues were. I knew my hormones were super out of balance post-surgery. And so then, given all the fundamental building blocks to fix it, it was kind of a non-negotiable for me. It wasn't like after I'd had that few months of protesting it, I don't want to do this, I don't like what I'm being asked to do. I kind of had that moment where the veil was torn, right? And was like, okay, well, it really doesn't matter what you want to do. If you want to feel better, if you want to have natural energy, if you want to not be so fatigued and black out all the time, these are the necessary steps. You either do them and see change and results from that, or you don't and you stay right where you are. So for me, I felt like I had a motivating factor to say, hey, I'm willing to like cold turkey do this. And so I quit caffeine. You can drink coffee black with raw cream. I like my coffee with honey. I love a good latte. And so for me, it was easier just to remove that temptation altogether than to have it in a way I didn't enjoy. And so that is what I chose to do. And you guys, it didn't take long at all before I started to notice the energy. Once I became okay with eating enough, again, that was a big thing coming from juices and smoothies. Like, this idea of eating this massive plate of meat was like, really kind of turned me off. But once I got used to it, I was able to eat more meat, right? My body needed it. It took up all those resources and immediately distributed them where they needed to go. And so what I noticed immediately within the first week, I'd lost 8 pounds. Didn't really have 8 pounds to lose, but I dealt with inflammation a lot. I carried a lot of water. My legs would swell at the end of the day. Just after being outside working all day, I'd have puffy ankles. You know, I would carry a lot of that. I had no inflammation whatsoever. I had no bloating whatsoever. My skin started to heal and just glow, and it was radiant. My hair started to grow again. I started to see a lot of positive effects of this in a very short amount of time, which caused me to be really motivated, right? Super encouraged to want to continue to do that. And that is actually one of the main reasons people choose to do the carnivore diet, is that there have been studies done where it does reduce inflammation, which if that's something you deal with and it's chronic, finding some sort of relief from that can be huge. And another positive thing I would say, if I'm gonna cheat on something, I have a massive sweet tooth, okay? And so one, I think giving up a lot of the carbs, were sourdough, you know, people too, so I was eating a lot of bread, eating a lot of potatoes, things like that. I think giving up the carbs, forcing my body into ketosis from the fasting I was doing, and then just feeding it all this nutrient-dense protein, I started to see, you know, a lot of positive effects from that. And it started to change a lot of things in my body. I remember my first cycle I had on carnivore, One, it was the first time I had a cycle that was once a month instead of twice a month since my surgery, which was huge. This was nothing I'd ever dealt with before, except after I had my surgery. And so given the job that I'm doing, I've never been one that's been crippled by my cycle or had to lay in bed or dealt with, nausea or anything like that. And so having this new change was extremely difficult for me. And so that was one of my biggest things I wanted to get from this is, yes, obviously I didn't want to be deficient in these things, but I wanted some sort of normalcy. I wanted my body to reset and go back to factory settings, if you will, because that to me was very, very challenging. So my first cycle on the carnivore diet, my cycle was 3 days long. I had no bloating, no cramping, my skin didn't break out, and usually that was always a sign I got around my cycle. Was I could tell my face started changing, it started becoming dry, I started getting acne, I started bloating and cramping, and like I knew what was coming. And I remember looking at Nathan and I was just like, oh my gosh, I feel so great. I have energy, I'm not cramping, I'm not bloating, I'm not, for me, you guys, I don't even think you realize how life-giving this was, having been that the last several months that was all I was doing was coming on and off a cycle. That was not fun with all the other symptoms that had came with that. And so that minute right there I realized, like, wow, this is worth it. And I started tying what I was eating more to hormone health and balance in that moment than I think I had the weeks prior I'd been doing it. Yes, I noticed that, I wasn't bloated. My inflammation had went down. My skin was glowing because I wasn't craving sugary things or drinking, smoothies that had natural sugars in them, but they were still sugars and that was still affecting different things. And so I was noticing all these other positive results, but I would say that was the first time during my time on the carnivore diet that I realized what I was doing and what I was nourishing my body with was directly affecting my hormonal health and my hormone balance in a positive way. And that was extremely encouraging to me. And so I equate that to, I was then taking in all of this really nutrient dense fat from the different animals I was eating, which was directly positively affecting my hormone function and my balance. And I then started researching, okay, the carnivore diet in correlation to like hormone health, which wasn't anything I had really done before. And I realized that there's a lot of studies and research to where it is directly linked to hormone balance because you're getting all of those key nutrients from the animal protein itself, all of those essential fats, all those trace minerals, all of the goodness in there. And so that's when I really started to connect the pieces and realize, okay, this might actually be my ticket to try to restore my hormonal health and balance. And so I was like, okay, instead of doing just a month, I think I can do this for 2 months and just go even further and see if I can really kind of make this happen. Also knew, based off of all of the testing I did with the functional medicine doctor, I was extremely low in iron and iodine. My omega fatty acids were really low, so she of course gave me some different supplements. We did a lot of stuff on restoring the gut health, which we eat a ton of fermented food, so that was also a big surprise to me, is that my gut health, because of my lack of essential nutrients in meat, was having kind of a negative effect on my gut. So we started doing all these things. She put me on an omega-3 and all of these things. And that was another thing that I started realizing, is the more that I started eating these animal proteins that had this, the less I needed the supplements, because I was getting everything from a whole food perspective. I didn't need supplementation. I didn't crave coffee anymore. I didn't crave sugary things. There's a lot of studies too that certain foods can help reduce sugar cravings. I found that very, very true. Even now, the more broccoli I eat, the less I crave sugar. The more meat I eat, the less I crave sugar and starches and even caffeine. And so I started to see, okay, I can eat this and it gives me, what my body thought I needed, this thing, which is why I chose to crave that. Well, when I was actually not deficient in that, I actually got everything I needed to prevent those cravings. So when you choose to have a carnivore diet and you're eating primarily, just meat, and again, quality is huge, you know, that meat is packed full of zinc, omega fatty acids, iron, zinc, vitamin B12, all of these things that if you are a woman, you know are very, very important for reproductive health, for fertility. And so all of these things that they say are like optimal, right, for pregnancy that you find in a lot of over-the-counter prenatals, you are getting a lot of that through the meats that you are eating, which again, here's where I'm going to tie this all together, is a huge reason that I have mentioned on here. I think the carnivore diet not only reset my hormones, because I have since been regulated on that. I had a period once a month. They were light. I felt great. Something I was even doing too is before I knew a cycle would come, I was eating predominantly meats, even if I was including some other things in my diet as well, just to be able to help with the preparation of my cycle coming. So I hadn't stopped carnivore for very long. In fact, it was probably about 2 months, and here we are. I was pregnant. Now, again, a little bit of my backstory. Nathan and I have dealt with infertility our entire marriage. I've always had issues with having high enough levels to maintain pregnancy. So I could get pregnant, but I was lacking all of the things to maintain a pregnancy. So they suggested progesterone shots and things like that. All the things that we declined, and we just kind of left that in God's hands of like, when the right time comes, it will be the right time. But this idea of just getting pregnant is nothing Nathan and I have known for almost the 10 years that we've been married. And so I accredit a lot of that to having been on the carnivore diet, because my body was like now, for probably the first time in a very long time, not deficient in nutrients. Not only was it getting all of those key nutrients that my body actually needed to thrive, it was getting all these key nutrients that your body needs to be reproductive, right? To get pregnant, to sustain a pregnancy. All these key nutrients that a baby needs to thrive. Like, that's why they tell you to get a prenatal vitamin, is because there's a lot of things in that that you're probably not getting. They talk about the importance of this and that. Well, why is that? Because your baby needs certain things, and I really feel like I was providing myself with all of those things, and I was no longer deficient in that it created my body as an optimal host to be able to get pregnant and sustain a pregnancy. So for the first time, you know, I was pregnant, I didn't realize it, and I was pregnant. We had no issues with miscarriage. It was, aside from morning sickness that took place, I was overall feeling very, very healthy. And even now that I am pregnant, and I'll talk about this more in a whole foods-based pregnancy video I'm doing, you know, I'm taking beef organs. Why is that? Because there's nutrients in those organs that are crucial that you just can't get outside eating those organs. And so that's kind of my journey with, why did I choose the carnivore diet? Well, I chose it because my hormones were all over the place. I really needed to restore my hormone health for me personally, for me mentally, to reset my whole body. I did a very, basic, to the point carnivore diet. I used the resources that we had here on our farm. I sourced out very, very little. I stuck to the plan, right? Again, I think it's really important to know your why, and really hold fast to that and remind yourself, you can do hard things, especially if it's temporary. And the carnivore diet is hard, especially if you're not eating a healthy diet to begin with, especially if you come from a plant-based perspective. It's gonna be hard regardless. There's so many of you guys watching this that could fill in that blank. But you have to remind yourself that you can do hard things. It is only temporary. I personally would not ever do carnivore long-term unless it was like you needed to manage some sort of diagnosis that you got. But it taught me so many things too, that I didn't go back to how I was pre-carnivore diet. I didn't go back to a plant-based diet. I'm now on a whole foods-based diet. I don't even really like the word diet, but that's what we're following. So again, high protein, low carbs, very specific about the vegetables that we are eating, more dark leafy greens, especially because I'm pregnant, less starchy vegetables, things like that. So again, being super, super mindful. I'm only drinking 1 cup of coffee a day with raw cream, local honey, like being very intentional on those things. The more you put into your body and the more you steward your body well, the better you're gonna get out of it. And I think that that is something that I really learned through this whole process is, one, I would have considered myself healthy. Yes, I was super caffeine dependent and kind of like a little scattered hummingbird a lot of the times. But if you asked me if I was healthy, I would say I was healthy. I didn't eat loads of sugar. You know, I drink juice every single day. I had a nutrient-packed smoothie. So one, it kind of came as a shock to me that I was having all of these deficiencies and all of these issues because I didn't really see the bigger picture, right? I didn't really kind of go back to, well, how was it originally? How do we mimic how it was originally designed to be? And so that was very eye-opening to me. And then when I started seeing the positive effects that it had on my body, that was really encouraging. And now I am in a place where I am doing CrossFit. I feel great, and I'm not doing CrossFit, this high intensity thing that's causing me to go into fight and flight, and it's causing a ripple effect, a negative ripple effect, because what I'm doing is I'm not over caffeinating. I'm fueling my body with 3 meals a day and sufficient snacks, and I am getting in the right nuts and the right proteins and what little, you know, starches I am adding in. They're good, healthy starches. I'm adding good, healthy fats. My body has everything it needs to thrive. So now when I do a workout like CrossFit, it doesn't go, my fight or flight response doesn't kick in overdrive. In fact, we're just the same because my body was balanced before I ever started that. And so there have been so many positive aspects for me for doing the carnivore diet. I know everyone's story is different, but I wanted to share with you guys why I started it. I was kind of pushed to start it. Some of the things I felt during and how I felt afterwards. And so now I'm so thankful that I did that because I am able to follow a whole foods-based pregnancy a lot easier than I feel like I would have before if I would have even gotten pregnant before. So if you were to ask me right now, is the carnivore diet right for me? I don't know. I don't feel like I can answer that question for you. I know that I was in a place in my journey, my health journey, my quest for balance in my hormones that I was willing to do anything, right? Again, I am not a medical practitioner. I am not a doctor. I am not giving health advice. I am simply sitting here and sharing with you guys why I did it and what worked for me. But I do know I've talked to a lot of people and there have been so many positive responses and impacts from this, just the nutrient density quality of meat. Like some of you guys, I know me, we may have never even, you know, had access to receive those nutrients because of the diet or the lifestyle we were following before. It is going to help with hormone balance just because we're all deficient in some way or another. It has been proven to help reduce inflammation. So for me, there was enough positive what ifs this could happen for me. And I really didn't have anything to lose. And so I'm one of those people, I'm changing things constantly. I love to keep my body guessing. I love to challenge myself. And so for me, that's how I would view it. Ask yourself, what do you have to lose? Have you been seeking answers and nothing's happening? Have you been not feeling the best? Have you been, you know, trying to get pregnant and can't? Maybe you were like me and you could get pregnant and you had a hard time sustaining pregnancy. Like, again, this is one of those areas where you can fill in the blank on could this work for me? But then I would ask yourself, what do you have to lose? And if the answer is nothing, then I think there's your answer right there on if the carnivore diet is right for you. So I had to fill in those blanks for myself. I had to ask myself, what am I seeking restoration in? What am I hoping to achieve? And what do I have to lose by doing this? And I realized I had nothing to lose at that point and everything to gain. And so I essentially put my yes on the table and said, I'm gonna do this. And I am so glad that I did. It's taught me so many things. It's taught me to view protein differently, if I'm being honest. It's taught me to value the importance of protein and the role that it plays, especially now growing a human. I know that that is so, so vital. So I hope by sharing my story, it offered a little clarity as to why I chose to do the carnivore diet, how I feel like that has affected my hormone health, how it has affected pregnancy for me, kind of just like my pregnancy perspective on it all. And yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. Again, I don't think there's any right or wrong way. I think that this is where your intuition really gets to play a key role, and you get to decide what you think is best for you. But if there's any way I can offer some sort of help in just my story and my journey, I am happy to do that. So leave a comment down below. But thank you guys for hanging out with me. I'll talk to you soon.